everybody. This is Indie Dev Education. And before I proceed, I'd like to start by saying Happy Valentine's Day to every single one of you out there. I hope you're having a great day. Today's lesson will be the Graphic Design Tutorial 1, which will be your first composition. So as you can imagine, this is an extremely exciting lesson, and I am glad to be your tutor. So let's proceed. Okay, in this lesson, you'll learn an introduction to Inkscape, the basics of graphic compositions, creating and manipulating vector objects, an introduction to colors and gradients, typography, which is like fonts, image and vector imports into Inkscape, and finally, exporting the final composition. So you might be asking yourself the obvious question, what is Inkscape? Well, in my own words, I define Inkscape as a versatile vector graphics and illustration application available for Windows, Mac, and Linux operating systems. The best part of the story is that Inkscape is completely free for both personal and commercial uses. So I've put a link on the screen for you to check it out. But if you don't already have Inkscape on your system, you don't need to worry about a thing. I will talk you through how to download and install it on your system. And you might also be asking yourself, what is a vector graphics application? Don't worry about that too. In a separate lesson, I will cover all these things. So now that we have a basic understanding of what Inkscape is, let us proceed to another vital definition that is so important to this particular lesson, and that is, what is a composition? In my own words, I define a composition as an artistic piece of work that incorporates illustrations, imagery, and typography to convey a message across to an observer. What this simply means is that every single graphic designer, whether advanced or intermediate or beginner, on this planet will have to compose something to arrive at a final result, which is exactly what I'll be taking you through today. So, the first step of this tutorial will be to acquire Inkscape if you don't already have it on your system. For those who do, please bear with us, as my tutorials are designed to cater to the absolute beginner. So head over to the website known as inkscape.org, as you can see on the screen. Once you've successfully done that, at the top of the screen, you will notice a few headers like About, Download, News, Community, etc. We're interested in downloading Inkscape, so what we'll do is hover our mouse over the download button, just as you can see on the screen, and you click on download. This will immediately take us to another page where you can see different operating systems being listed. For the sake of this tutorial, we'll be focusing on the Windows operating system. So if you have Linux or maybe Mac versions of Inkscape, don't worry, this tutorial still applies. So if we, for example, click on the Windows button, we're met with two options, which is the 32 and 64-bit options. If you have a system with RAM as high or above 8 gigabytes, then I'd say download the 64-bit version. If not, stick to the 32-bit version. Once you click on that, it also gives you another option to install the exe format or the MSI Windows installer package. Either one would do, to be honest. So whichever you feel comfortable selecting, that's fine by me. So just select, for example, the MSI. And it will ask you, where would you like to install this? Obviously, I already have it on my system, so I don't need to install it again. So I'll just say cancel. Once it has successfully downloaded to your system, you launch the executable or the MSI package and go through the installation process to save Inkscape on your system. Once you've successfully done that, you can launch Inkscape by going over to the search bar at the bottom, which is like a little circle. Click on it and type in ink. And as you see, it already brings up Inkscape. You can just click on that and launch Inkscape. Okay, so far, so good. If you followed every single instruction up until now, you'll find yourself with a blank Inkscape document that looks something similar to what we have on the screen. Now, before we proceed, we need to ensure that certain prerequisites are in place before we get down to business. The first thing we'd have to do is to change the orientation of our document. If you look at the screen, you will notice that we're working with a portrait document. And a portrait document is one where the width is shorter than the height. However, a landscape document, on the other hand, is one where the width is longer than the height. Now, for the sake of this tutorial, we will be using a landscape document. So let's proceed to ensure that we change the default from portrait to landscape. Now, to do that, you move over to the top of your document there, the menu, and click on File and click on Document Properties. It will load up a dialog box similar to this with many properties that you can easily change. Now, if this doesn't show up as it has on the screen, you don't need to worry about a thing. All you do is hold down Shift, Control, and D. And once you do that, the document will bring up that interface for you to change the properties. Once you have that in front of you, you will notice that A4 is selected as a default, which is the size of the document we'll be working with. And all you need to do is click on this radio button over there, which changes it immediately to a landscape. Once you've successfully done that, you move down to an item on the Inkscape user interface known as Fill and Stroke. Clicking on it will bring up an interface that looks like this. If you cannot see this, just hold down Shift, Control, and F, and it will pop up like that. So now we have the document the way we want it in the right orientation. We will now proceed to creating a vector object. To the left of the Inkscape user interface, you will notice a couple of items lined up at the sidebar. These items are here to help you easily create shapes and access certain properties. In this case, we're looking to create a rectangle. And that rectangle will be manipulated and will serve as the background for our composition today. So you move your mouse over here to the left hand side of the user interface, hover over the option that says create rectangles and squares, click on it, and just hold down your mouse, which is the left mouse button, and drag across your canvas. Okay, don't worry about what size you create. We can always manipulate that later on. Now, some of you might have your square with rounded corners that look like this. That's not a problem. You will notice that there's a circular manipulator at the top right of your rectangle. By holding down the right mouse button and dragging it, you can manipulate the roundness and the sharpness of the edge of your rectangle, which we have here. Okay, so we like to have that as a sharp edged rectangle. Now, once you have done with that, ensure that you click on the top cursor there, the one which is the top option there, which will now select the rectangle you have just created. We intend to have this rectangle fill out the whole canvas because it's going to act as our background. Now, something which you could do, which is a trick to making sure that both ends of your rectangle are being resized simultaneously, is to hover over one of the arrows that appear at the edge. For example, this one. Hold down the Shift key on your keyboard and then you drag it. If you notice, the rectangle is expanding at both sides. This is good for the sake of symmetry and also saves you having to manually adjust both sides individually. So what you do is the same exact procedure for the height. You hover over one of the arrows over there, which you can see lights up blue once you're over it. You put your finger on the Shift key on your keyboard and you drag, and it resizes it in both ways. Brilliant. We've successfully created and manipulated our rectangle. However, as you can see, the rectangle only contains one color, which is a red color. Now, if you wanted to change this color, you will notice at the bottom of the user interface, there are many color gradients that have been lined up for us to select from. By clicking on the fill, just at the bottom left over here, if you click on it, and then you click on any color, you will notice that our rectangle changes color as well, which is very good. So the next thing we would like to do is to manipulate the default color. And seeing as we'd like to stick to a Valentine's Day theme, we'll go with red. We want a red gradient. So the question is this: what is a gradient? A gradient is something or a set of colors that show a progression from a darker end to a much lighter end, or even two separate types of colors. An example of a gradient on this user interface is the one over here to the right of the page where the mouse is moving. This shows a red gradient from darker red on the left moving over to a much lighter red to the right. We would like our background to look something similar to this. So how do we achieve that? It's actually pretty simple. You move your mouse over to the second option on the sidebar here, where you can see a very narrow cursor with 3 boxes just over it. While your rectangle is currently selected, move your mouse over to that second option, which says Edit Paths by Nodes, and click on it. Once you click on it, you will notice that that arrow, which is the cursor, has changed to something which is more narrow, which is good. The next stage is to go over to your fill and stroke interface to the far right of this Inkscape canvas. And what you do is you select the second option, which says linear gradient, because we want to create from darker red to lighter red. But the moment we click on it while our rectangle is still selected, you will notice something very strange, that the right hand side is much lighter than the left hand side. That's not a problem at all. In fact, that's something similar to what we're looking for. All we need to do now is to manipulate this gradient so that it shows colors exactly how we want it to do. So the first way, and the most important and easiest way to do this, is to hover while this mouse cursor is still on that sharp cursor. You move over to one of the points, hover over it, and you see it looks red. Click on it, and then click on one color, for example, this red over here, maroon. After doing so, you go to the other end of the gradient controller and you will notice there's a circular handle there. What you do is that you click on that circular handle and then click on another color. And what do you have? You have a nice, beautiful gradient over there from red to orange. You can make it to lighter red. You can make it to blue. You can change it to any color you want while it is highlighted. So for the sake of this tutorial, we're going to go for something which would look like that, which is a darker red to a lighter red. So we go and click over here, which is the square handle. We click a dark red, and over here, which is the circular handle, we click on it and then go and click on another color. It could be any color of your choice. So I'm just clicking a lighter red. Now, what we have is a linear gradient. However, can we manipulate this even more? The answer to that question is absolutely. How can we do that? By clicking on one of the gradient controllers and holding down the left mouse button. If you drag that around your canvas, you will notice that we are changing the position of the dark red relative to the light red. As you can see, that's beautiful. It gives us a very high amount of control. What we could even do is move it down to the corner over there and it snaps into place. And then we can move the circular controller to that top corner there. Brilliant. Our gradient is starting to take shape. Now, in the introduction to this particular lesson, we talked about manipulating vectors, creating vectors. Now it's time for us to import objects into our composition to give it more meaning. Now, those of you who followed the first lecture will remember that we created a clean cutout from a GIMP image. And that clean cutout was a final output that had an alpha channel, which means a transparent background or no background at all. So let's now go and bring that image into this composition. Okay, welcome back. Now we're about to import other objects like images and vectors into our composition. But just before we do that, I'd like to point two things out to you. The first thing is you'd notice that the bars surrounding, or should I say the arrows that were surrounding my background have suddenly disappeared. The reason why that is because I clicked on an area outside the canvas, which deselects any object within the canvas. So for example, you see this? This looks similar to what we had before. By clicking on the outside of the canvas, those arrows suddenly disappear. Now the next thing I would like to show you is moving your canvas from side to side, the view of your canvas. You notice that just beneath and to the side of our composition, we have some scroll bars. By clicking on the left mouse button and moving this scroll bars, you can adjust the view of your canvas. So what if you want to scroll in or zoom in to have a better view of your work? Well, that's pretty simple. You hold down the Control key on your keyboard and you zoom in, or by rolling the mouse forward, or zoom out by retracting it backwards, scrolling it down. So that's how you zoom in and out. Okay, so let's proceed with the importing. Now, based on our last lesson, you might remember this image with the checkered background, which tells us that this lady in the middle of this image is the only aspect of this image which is active, the transparent background is now in place. And the background that used to be there before, which is this background, has suddenly disappeared. For those of you who would like to know how to do this, please visit the first tutorial that was published to this channel. Now, I'm interested in this image. So what I'll do is I'll go back to where I have this image on my hard drive. I'll click on this image by holding it down, and I'll drag it onto my canvas in Inkscape. The moment I do that, you notice that a dialog box has popped up asking me a few simple questions. Now, the first option is to leave it as embed. The image DPI, don't worry about DPIs. I'll explain that to you in a separate lesson. So we'll leave that at default import resolution. And the image rendering mode should be smooth, which is the second option down. Once that has happened, or once all these options are selected as you see them on the screen, you click OK. Bam! Now we have our PNG image on our canvas, and it looks absolutely beautiful. Now you can see the advantage of making a clean cutout, because the moment you decide to use that image, it helps you make your composition look much more professional. Now, this image, as you can see, is clearly much bigger than the canvas, and that's not what we want. We want an image that is contained within the canvas. So the fastest and most efficient way to resize this image without distorting it is to click on the image, and you will notice that these arrows suddenly pop up again. Make sure that when you click on the image that the arrows are straight and not bent like that. To toggle that, you can just click on the image till it looks like that. And then you hold down the Control key on your keyboard, move your mouse cursor to the top edge or any edge of this image. While the Control key is held down, you drag to shrink that image. Now, one thing you will notice is that the image, while it's being shrunk, is not distorted. That is the importance of holding down the Control key while resizing. In the same manner that we resized our vector object, we have applied that technique to the image to ensure that it fits on the canvas. So you can just resize that till you're satisfied with the size, and then you move it onto the canvas. So I'll do that right now. That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Don't worry about this transparent aspect that goes out of our canvas. That's not a problem for us, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, so you position that till you're satisfied. And I've decided to put the lady on the far left of this composition. And at the bottom, just make sure that the image spills out of the canvas just a little bit. Now we have that in place. The next stage of this tutorial is to import a vector object. A vector object is one that has an SVG extension. That SVG extension stands for Scalable Vector Graphics. Now, this is a heart, obviously, and I'm going to drag that into this composition in the same manner that I have dragged the image. If you notice very carefully, no questions were asked, which is good and which makes sense. because Inkscape is a scalable vector graphics application, so it easily recognizes a vector object. Now, as soon as we have this vector object in here, clicking on it, I'm selecting any of these colors at the bottom shows us that we can easily manipulate the color of this heart. And if we really wanted to, we can actually apply a gradient to this heart, just like we did to the background. We can apply a radial gradient or a linear gradient. So for the sake of this tutorial, we will apply a radial gradient. So while the heart is selected, click on the third option under the fill dialog box here, which is the fill and stroke interface. Click on it and you will notice that our image has come up looking a bit too red on the outside, which is not a problem. It's just the choice of color. To alter that gradient, all we need to do is click on that second option. Remember the edit paths and nodes? Click on that. And then once that is clicked, you can see a sort of L manipulator like that. Click on the edge or any of the edges of that L manipulator and select a color. It could be very dark red like that, whichever suits you best. My advice will be to select a color that enables the background to stand out, or should we say a color that encourages a contrast so that the heart is visible. Clicking on the middle junction of that L, also, just as you've manipulated the edges by clicking on any of these, you can also click or change that color to whichever you like. And you can see there's some pretty good combinations you can have there. So we've successfully created a linear gradient for the background. And now we've proceeded to create a radial gradient for the heart. So I'm extremely happy with this. And if you've been following this lesson up until this point, your heart should look something like this. What about manipulating the position of this radial gradient? Is that possible? Of course it is. If you hold down the left mouse button and click over that gradient, you see you can move it wherever you want within the heart. In fact, if you go over to one of the gradient manipulators on this L gradient manipulator and you drag it, you will now notice that you can even manipulate the size of the middle color to however you see fit. Don't be afraid to try this out on yourself. Please feel free to manipulate it to how you see fit. Once you have successfully created this radial gradient, the next stage is to click on this first cursor at the top left of the bar. That bar on the left of the Inkscape user interface. Just click on that one there, which brings us back to the size manipulator. We would like to manipulate and resize this heart without distorting it. So we hold down the Control key on the keyboard, drag one of the arrows at the end, and you will see that that heart is scaling symmetrically according to how, without losing the shape or being distorted. Now that we have that heart in there, which is a vector object, and we're satisfied with what we've done, the next stage is to add some text. So we can position our heart over here. And now we're going to add some text to this composition. How do we add text? It's very simple. on the left hand side of the Inkscape user interface, just where we have all these items over here, you will notice one which shows A with a prompt, and hovering over it says create and edit text objects. This is exactly what we want. So we click on that, and anywhere on your canvas, you just create a box, something that looks like this, by clicking on the canvas and dragging across, and then you see a prompt there. So seeing as we're in the Valentine's Day mood, we'll say or type Happy Valentine's Day. Okay, so I like what I'm looking at. At the bottom left, or should I say bottom right, of this text object we've created, you will notice a manipulator there. What's that for? That manipulator enables us to create more space in case we would like to let our text spill down to the bottom here. So that's exactly what I'd like to do. So what I'll do is click and move the prompt to just before the V, press enter, and then put it just before the D and press enter. That's looking good. So you can resize this box if you wish to. Now that we've successfully done that, the next stage is to click on this top arrow at the left hand side menu bar over here. Just click on that top arrow and you will notice that the manipulators suddenly disappear. This is good because it means that we can resize our text to how we want it. But if you notice, our text object is actually to the right, to the left, and aligned to the left, which is not what we want. We want it to be centered. So how do we change and manipulate a text object even further? Well, it's pretty simple. While the text is highlighted, you click on text and you go down to text and font. Text is found at the top menu here. You click on text, go to text and fonts, and you'll notice that a dialog box opens up, repeating exactly what you've typed on your canvas in here. Now, all these fonts listed to the left here of this scroll menu are the fonts that we have on our PC, the system fonts. You can change the thickness of the text, you can change the font size, you can even change the alignment, which is what we wanted to do. To change the alignment, you click on any of these options over here. I want it to be centered, so I click on centered. I would also like to change it to something that looks more stylish than what we already have here. So, you can select any font you want, but I've decided to select Alex Brush. Wow, that looks pretty nice. So I've selected Alex Brush. I've selected that the text should be centered. I'm happy with the font size being at 30. You can change it if you wish. And once you're satisfied with those options, all you need to do is click on apply. Voila. Look at that. It's looking pretty lovely. So we're going to manipulate this text even more, but now we don't need this dialog box anymore, so we just close it down. Now, if you would like to resize a text object without having to use the text and font manipulator from this menu, another very quick way to do it is to make sure that the text is highlighted. So I'll zoom into this text now, okay? And what I'll do is make sure that my mouse cursor is over one of these arrows at the edges. And just like we know before, we hold down the control button on the keyboard and drag. And you can see that this text object has been made much bigger. And it looks beautiful. Now, is it possible to change the color of a text? Absolutely. That's pretty easy to do as well. The fastest way and the best way to change the color of a text object is to ensure that the text has been highlighted, and then just at the bottom where you use the colors to change the vector colors of the vector object, you just click on any color and you can see just how it changes according to whichever color you wish. So we'll select something. I think I'm happy with the purple color. Yeah, I'm happy with the light purple color, and we'll leave it as that. Now, we've gone from a blank canvas to something that looks beautiful. And if you wish, you can add more hearts, you can add more text, and to add another heart is pretty simple. You click on the heart you already have, you press Ctrl C, and then Ctrl V, and another heart is created. But then you'll notice that the new heart we created is actually blocking everything else. It's at the top layer. You don't need to worry about that. For now, what you should do is just resize it to make it smaller, just as we've been resizing everything. Leave it over there, or you could move it down if you wish. It's up to you. And then what we have is something pretty brilliant. So it's up to you. I encourage you to experiment. Copy and paste, move objects around. It's really up to you. So I'll just delete that heart over there. Now that we've done that, you can add more text by saying, for example, clicking on this text object over there, Ctrl C and Ctrl V. Okay, make sure the text object you've just copied and pasted is highlighted, and then you drag it down over here, and then you could say, you know, from indie dev education. Now what we have is a composition that includes vector objects that have been manipulated to our wish, an image object on the same canvas, as well as a text object on the same canvas. This is brilliant, and if you've got up until this stage, even with no graphic design experience, you should be proud of yourself. So we're now going to move over to the next stage of this tutorial, which is exporting your piece of work so that you can share it with your friends, your loved ones, or your special Valentine. We have reached the end of our tutorial. Well done if you've got up to this stage. It's now time for us to export our composition as an image so that you can share with your friends and loved ones. Obviously, you can make modifications to what you're looking at on the screen so that it suits your purpose even better. So to export our composition, we go up to the top left of the page, click on File, move down to Export PNG Image. Okay, once you click on that, a box or an interface that looks exactly like this should pop up. If that doesn't happen, don't need to worry. Just press Ctrl, Shift and E, or Shift Ctrl E, and you will see this interface to the right of Inkscape popping up. Before we export, we need to check a few things. Now, to export your composition and ignore everything out of the boundaries of your canvas, what you do is you click on Page. This is good for ensuring that your composition is exported in a very clean cut manner. Every other option there, you don't need to worry about that. We will always come back to that at a different date where I will go in depth to explain to you page sizes, measurements, pixels, DPIs, etc. So you can export it to any location on your hard drive. All you need to do is to navigate to that location and get the path wherever it is, could be your desktop, and make sure, this is a very important thing, you need to make sure that whatever you name the file has a .png at the end of it, unless when you export it, nothing's gonna come up. So I've just put gdl01.png. I'm happy with the location that I wish to save my composition. And I just scroll down to the bottom over here and I'll click on export. Okay, no errors came up. Everything looks fine. So I'll proceed to make sure that everything is as I intended to be. This is the location I saved it. It looks okay from this view, so I'm going to double click that to make sure. Beautiful. Do you notice that a little portion of her finger has been cut off? The reason why is because we selected to export the page, which means anything which goes out of the page will be cut off, which is good for ensuring that your composition is exported in clean dimensions. So if you've got up to this stage, I would like to say congratulations, you've done well, and even with no graphic design experience, you have successfully created your first graphic design composition, which is a Valentine's Day greeting card. Feel free to change the image in the composition to suit you best. Obviously, you can customize it for your needs, but the most important thing is that you've been able to follow till this point, and now that you have the fundamentals of graphic design, we can now move over to more complex topics and do far more exciting things. All the source files for this tutorial have been enclosed in the description at the bottom of this video, so you can download the SVG files and experiment with them. Feel free to share your creations with your friends, your loved ones, and your special Valentines. And I'd like to say that congratulations to you. And from Indie Dev Education, I'd like to say I look forward to seeing you at the next tutorial. Have a brilliant Valentine's Day and God bless.